Good evening. I'm Jim Mancini. I am the curator of our Autism 200 series, and welcome to our part 2 of addressing challenging behavior. So if you missed part 1 for whatever reason and you say, oh man, I should have checked out part 1, it is available online at our, if you go through our website. So we're very pleased to have Nancy Rosenberg come back. She asked me to not do a long bio for her, so I'm going to dispense with that and just say we're so happy that you're here. She's awesome. And she's at the University of Washington and director of the ABA program there. She might tell you a little bit more about that. And if teachers or anyone has any questions about how to get clock hours, I can talk to you after our lecture tonight. Welcome.
Okay, my mic working? Can everybody hear me? Okay, even in the back there? So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. The topic of challenging behaviors is definitely a passion of mine. It's what I focused on during my doctoral studies. It's what I did for many years consulting with both parents and school districts on how to address challenging behaviors in their children with autism. And so deciding what to talk about for this presentation, it's not hard for me to figure out what to talk about. What's really difficult is figuring out what not to talk about. I just actually finished last week teaching a quarter-long class that I teach at the University of Washington on strategies for addressing challenging behaviors. And I finished that 10-week class every year with like, oh, there's so much more I wish I could have told them. There's so many things that I had to leave out because there wasn't time. And so having to figure out what to talk about in an hour and a half is very challenging. So I've really thought about like what are the strategies that I think will give you the most bang for your buck, the ones that out of all the different strategies that you might be able to take home or take to school with you and try tomorrow and see if they work. It really helped. This is the first year. I've been doing this since the beginning, and I actually went back because I was like, boy, I think I've been doing this Seattle Children's series for a long time, and I went back and looked, and indeed I started in 2007, which was the first year that we actually did the series. In fact, I remember sitting around a table with a group of people here at Children's conceiving the idea of this series. And so this is the first year that we split it into a part 1 and a part 2, the topic of challenging behaviors. And that definitely helped me because it meant that a good piece talking about function of behavior was covered in part 1. And if you haven't seen Dr. Bolter's part 1, which is really about the assessment of problem behavior, I highly recommend it. I'm going to review it briefly here, just in case people haven't seen it, so they have some context. But again, if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it. So the framework that I use to talk about challenging behaviors is called positive behavior support. Positive behavior support has its roots in the field of applied behavior analysis. And just like challenging behaviors, it's this big, huge topic that I had to pick one small piece of to talk about tonight. So I picked out what I think are the 4 key ideas of positive behavior support that I wanted to focus on. The first one being one that was actually covered in the part 1 of this. So the key ideas of positive behavior support that I think are so important, one are the idea that behavior serves a function and that we can't treat the behavior, we can't tell you what strategies are going to work unless we know the function of the behavior. And again, I'm going to just touch briefly on that because Dr. Bolter already talked about it. Positive behavior support has a focus on prevention. So one thing that now I think is completely clear from decades of research is that if we focus on what to do after the behavior has happened, what the consequences for the behavior should be, in a lot of cases, there's just no good answers. Especially for kids on the autism spectrum, there's just problems. There's problems with punishment. There's problems with extinction, which means just kind of trying not to reinforce the behavior. What we really need to do is focus on trying to keep the behavior from happening in the first place. And it's not where people want to start. A lot of times when I come into a school or I come into a home, people want me to tell them, what do I do when he flops down on the floor and won't get up? Or what do I do when he hits his sibling? Or what do I do when he pulls my hair? And I have to say, it's too late. There's not really good answers at that point. We need to figure out what's happening so that he never flops down on the floor to begin with, or that we set things up so he doesn't pull your hair or hit his sibling. Just because there aren't really good answers after the fact. So a focus on prevention, and I'm going to give you a number of prevention strategies tonight. Another huge idea of positive behavior support is the idea that we're going to teach a replacement for the behavior. A cardinal rule is that you never teach the child what not to do. You always teach them something else to do instead. And we're going to talk about how you might do that. And then the last big idea of positive behavior support, I call minimize, maximize. And again, we'll talk more about what that means, but the basic idea is we're going to try to minimize the reinforcement for the problem behavior and maximize the reinforcement for appropriate behavior and or the replacement behavior. So those are the 4 big ideas. We're going to focus tonight on the last 3, but I'm just going to touch, like I said, briefly on this idea that behavior serves a function. So how many of you in this room were here for Dr. Bolter's talk or have seen it? Good. So now you get a test. Do you remember what you learned? So this idea that behavior serves a function is the idea, again, coming out of decades of research in the field of applied behavior analysis, that if a behavior is continuing, it's getting reinforced in some way. Whether it's a problem behavior, whether it's any of our behaviors, we continue to do things that are getting reinforced for us, that are working in some way, and we stop doing things that aren't getting reinforced. So if your student or your child is continuing to engage in a behavior, it's getting reinforced in some way. And that reinforcement is what we call the function. So the functions of behavior fall into 2 big categories. Does anybody remember what those categories are? Yes. To escape or avoid something. Perfect. That's one of the categories. To get something, to obtain something, or I think Eric or Dr. Bolter called it to gain something. So those are the big categories that up until now, all functions of behavior that they've discovered seem to fall in. So to escape, avoid activity. So who can give me an example from just a generic example or example from your own experience of a behavior that a child's engaging in to escape an activity or avoid an activity?
Well, I can tell you what my daughter does. Is, sometimes if they're placing demands on her and she doesn't want to do something, she has learned to do several different types of behaviors, but sometimes she'll pull people's hair because she has learned that when I do that, they stop and they go balloon time out.
Yes, that is a great example. And I'll probably be, for you guys in the room, I'll probably be repeating a lot of what you say, not because I'm a parrot, but so that the people at the other sites can hear it. So she just gave the example of her child pulling hair at the therapy table because her child gets placed in timeout. So she's learned that pulling hair gets reinforced by getting away from the table. So escape or avoid interaction. So a child who hits another child when that child tries to interact with them so that the other child leaves. A very effective way if you don't want to have to interact to get another child to leave. I've seen kids who will emit a high-pitched scream when another child comes near to escape or avoid interaction. So to escape pain or discomfort. So sometimes we'll see kids engaging in behavior to try to get rid of something internal. So I don't know if any of you've ever seen a child who starts hitting their head because they have an ear infection, or scratching their stomach because they have a stomach ache. They're trying to escape that internal feeling of discomfort. So those are to escape or avoid. To obtain. So one of the things that kids engage in behavior for is to obtain attention. So who has an example of a behavior of a child to obtain attention? Yes?
My own daughter, to obtain attention, she'll start screaming in her head.
Yeah. And so she just said her daughter, to obtain attention, will start screaming and hitting her head. Now, there's nothing like hitting your head to get somebody to come running, right? Your mom may be busy trying to get dinner made, attend to a sibling. You start hitting your head, oftentimes somebody will run to you. So it can be a very effective way to obtain attention. To obtain food or toys. So the classic example in the grocery store of the child at the checkout who starts engaging in tantruming behavior because they want candy. And in that particular situation, their parent, their mom or dad's embarrassed because everybody's looking at them, so gives in and gives them the candy. So that the child learn, and kids can learn that in certain situations, this behavior will get reinforced, and in other situations it doesn't. So the child might learn that at the grocery store, if I start doing this, it results in the candy. Maybe in another situation it doesn't. A child who tantrums when you try to turn off their iPad or their computer or their video because they've learned that, you know, you're tired, you just can't deal with the tantrum. All right, we'll turn it on. You can watch a little bit more. So sometimes it's to obtain it. Sometimes it's to keep it going. Obtain activities. And then Dr. Bolter talked also about this function of what we call in behavior analysis automatic reinforcement, where a child's just doing it for some sort of internal reason, not because they're trying to get you to do something different, but because for whatever reason, and often we don't know, it's making them feel good. So a lot of what we call self-stimulatory behaviors in the autism world. Those are just to obtain internal stimulation. So that's the idea, the brief idea of behavior serving a function. And if you're interested in trying to understand how to figure out what function your child's behavior or your student's behavior is serving, I would again recommend you watch Dr. Bolter's part of this series, because I'm not going to talk anymore about how to figure out the function. I'm just going to stress how important it is. I think people kind of don't want to have to deal with this idea we have to figure out the function. They want me to come into their home or into their school and they say, my child's hitting his head, what should I do? And to me, that's kind of like you stepping into the doctor's office and saying, doctor, I have a headache, fix it. Well, what is the doctor going to do? What is the doctor going to say if you go into his office and say, I have a headache? He's going to get more information. He may run some tests. He may do some sort of different an examination of you. So you asking somebody, what should I do for my child hitting their head, is just like asking the doctor, what should I do for my headache? I have to tell you, I don't know until we know the function. So even though it seems like a bother to spend the time trying to figure out the function, it really does matter for what strategies you choose. And it matters for the prevention strategies you choose, it matters for replacement behaviors you may teach, and it matters for the consequences you may put in. So I'm just going to give you a couple examples of that. So I just said this anyway, we care about the function so we can choose the right prevention strategies, so we can teach appropriate alternative behaviors, and so we can set our consequences up right. So let me give you a couple examples. So say you have 8-year-old Johnny here who's misbehaving during math time. Okay, so this is a student. One of the prevention strategies that I'm going to talk about, which can be a very effective prevention strategy sometimes, is making the task easier. So if a child is trying to escape something, making it easier can be a very effective prevention strategy. So if the function of Johnny's behavior is to escape math because it's too difficult, this is a great prevention strategy, and it should really help in this situation. But if the function of Johnny's behavior is attention, if he's doing this because he loves it when the teacher comes over and starts yelling at him for misbehaving, is making it easier going to change that? No, it's not. It's not going to change at all. He's still going to want that attention. So you got to know the function. Okay, so here's 6-year-old Sarah misbehaving during transitions to gen ed classrooms. And I'm actually going to do quite a bit on transitions because they tend to be so problematic for kids on the spectrum. Okay, so one prevention strategy that I will talk about when talking about transitions is trying to make the transition more predictable, giving Sarah some sort of visual cue before the transition on where she's going. It can be a great prevention strategy that can be very helpful. So, if the function of her behavior is to escape unpredictable situations, she doesn't know where she's going, so she's trying to escape it, this is a great strategy, and it should really help with the situation. But if the function of her misbehaving on transitions to gen ed is that these transitions are from the sensory room to the gen ed classroom, and she really likes the sensory room and is trying to obtain more time in there, is showing her a visual of the gen ed classroom going to help with the situation? No. If anything, it's going to make it worse because she's like, oh, now I know where I'm going and I know I don't want to go there if she doesn't like gen ed. So again, you got to know the function. One last example.
Before you leave that,
yes?
what would you do in the case where
you're jumping ahead.
Oh,
yes, I'm going to get to it.
I have that problem.
Yes. Yes. So pay close attention when we get to the don't say no, say when strategy, okay? Perk your ears up when we get to that, because that would be a great thing here. Okay. 4-year-old Jeremy throwing food at the table. So this is talking about the consequences now and why it matters. So say we pick a consequence strategy of removal from the table. He throws food, he gets removed from the table. If the function is attention, if he loves it that when he starts throwing food, his sisters get all giggly and really like it that he's doing something he's not supposed to, then removing him from the table very well might really help with the problem, because he's taken away from where he's getting all this attention. He's going to probably stop doing things that get him removed from the table. But if the function is to escape, if he really doesn't like sitting at the table, it's too long a time, removing him from the table contingent on throwing is not going to work. In fact, he's going to start throwing food more because he's going to figure out that that's the way to get removed from the table. So can you see why in all of these situations you really have to know why they're doing it? That's when you think function, think why. Why is this working for them? You got to know it. So that's the kind of quick review of what was covered in Dr. Bolter's lecture. Now we're going to plunge into what I think is the really fun part, which is, okay, what are some strategies to deal with the behavior? But I want to just kind of tell you first, because I think it's important. It's important to me that my focus on positive behavior support and on what I'm going to be telling you didn't come to me because I started learning about it in school. I didn't become passionate about this because of an academic approach to it. I became passionate about this because I have my own son who has severe autism. He's 23 now. I can't quite believe that. Significantly impacted. And in his early years, and definitely his preschool years and much of his elementary years, we struggled with terrible, challenging behaviors. I mean, anything practically anybody can throw out at me, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember when we dealt with that. And we just weren't figuring out solutions, and we were trying all kinds of things. I first was trying, when my son was born and during his early child and elementary school, I wasn't in the field of special ed. I was just a mom who was trying to figure out my child with autism. And we were trying the strategies that you try with your typical kids, and I had a typically developing kid who was doing just fine and was behaving just fine, and none of it was working. And I was asking people, nothing was working. And I really thought that the problem was that I didn't have a consequence that worked for him. I couldn't do the things I did with my other child, but really wasn't getting any answers. So I decided to go back and get a PhD and see if I could figure out the answers. Isn't that what you would do? And I was so lucky that right when I started my PhD, I got it at the University of Washington, and they had just gotten a grant to develop leadership among doctoral students in positive behavior support. So literally my first week of school, I got to sit in on a seminar on positive behavior support and continued it all the way through school. And so I just started learning right away. And I just started taking the strategies and the principles that I was learning home with me and trying them with my son. We were struggling both at home, and they were struggling mightily at school. I mean, we were struggling everywhere. His SLP was struggling, his OT was struggling, his ABA therapists were struggling. And we just started using these strategies that I'm going to tell you about one by one, trying them out in the different places, and just saw over time his behaviors just start to decrease more and more. And I tell you, when he was like in second or third grade, I really thought there was no way we were going to be able to keep him home with us once he got bigger than me, because his behaviors were so extreme. And now he's 23, he's way bigger than me, and he still lives at home with us. We are delighted to have him living at home with us because he's a pleasure to be with, and we really, I feel like, got his behaviors under control with positive behavior support. And so that's why I care so much about kind of trying to help other people, because I've seen these things, how they can change a family's life. So that's just my little, why I care about this. Okay, so now let's move into a focus on prevention. So again, a huge topic, and I had to pick one piece of it to talk to you about tonight. So I decided I could choose 5 strategies to talk to you about. And I kind of cheated, because you'll see in a couple of them I embedded several strategies within that one. But still, I think these are, again, I was thinking about things that you could take home and try tomorrow. So the first one is the idea of shared control. So shared control. So I said that function matters, right? Function matters with prevention strategies. function matters with teaching new skills. So for each of these prevention strategies, I'm going to tell you which function it's likely to be most helpful for. It doesn't mean you shouldn't just do it in general, because these will help kind of across the board with behaviors, a lot of these strategies, but especially think about this if you know your child or your student has, for instance, in this case, an escape function. Okay, so one part of shared control is picking your battles. So a lot of times when a child is engaging in challenging behaviors, everything is a battle, just every part of the day. And I really internalized this when I read Ross Greene's book, The Explosive Child. Has anybody read that book here? A couple of you. It's not a book about kids on the autism spectrum. I was just reading it, kind of general challenging behaviors. But he had this one image that those of you who have read it here may remember, of the 3 baskets. You guys remember that? Those of you who said you'd read it. So he talks about these 3 baskets. So you have your child or your student and all their issues. You have to think about 3 baskets. One basket is, these are non-negotiable. I have to deal with these. I have to enforce them because they're safety issues. So for instance, I have to hold my child's hand when we cross the street. They have to wear their car seat. Things that I don't care if they like it or not. We just have to do it because it's safety. So that's one end of the spectrum. Then there's the things at the other end that we say, and then we'll get to the basket in the middle. At the other end are things like, yeah, I don't like it that he does that, but we're just going to let it go for now, for his sake and for our sake. So not everything is a battle. Yes, he shouldn't speak disrespectfully to me, but you know what? In the scheme of things, we're just going to let that go. Or yes, he shouldn't be chewing on his shirt. But you know what? With all the things we're dealing with, it's not a safety thing. It does look a little gross, but we're just going to let it go for now. And then in the middle basket are the things that, okay, these are the things that we're really going to focus on right now. We're going to use our prevention strategies. We're going to try to teach a replacement behavior. But you want the number of things in that basket to be pretty small. Because especially when we get to teaching replacement behaviors, it can be a lot of work. And believe me, I know what it's like to have to teach these things when you're tired and you haven't slept well because your child doesn't sleep well, and you just have so much going on. So you don't want to be tackling a lot of things at once. So that idea of picking your battles, think, could I just let go of this one for now? I think is the first thing in this idea of shared control. The next one is offering choices. So if you want to give partial control to your child, and what I've found working both with my son and lots of other kids is that when you're having lots of battles over control, like just trying to meet them halfway some of the times can make a huge difference. And so this idea of offering choices is that you decide the part of the activity or the task or the demand that is absolutely necessary to you. And then you try to figure out how to give them choice about everything else about it. So here's one example. So we used to have all of these battles around teeth brushing. My son hated to brush his teeth. So the non-negotiable was, we have to brush your teeth. But the choices were all around, okay, we got 2 different kinds of toothpaste. We have the SpongeBob toothpaste and we have the Disney Princess toothpaste. Which one do you want? We have 3 different toothbrushes. You can choose which one you want. Do you want to hold your squishy toy while I brush your teeth? Or do you want to hold your Spider-Man figurine? Do you want me to sing the Barney song? Or do you want me to sing you do not want me to sing the Barney song, let me. Or do you want me to sing row, row, row your boat. So I've kept the one thing I care about and tried to give choice about everything else. In school, you have to do handwriting because it's on your IEP. You might not want to tell him that, but that's what you as a teacher are thinking about. I have to make him write his name because it's on his IEP. That's my non-negotiable. But what are all the things I could give choice around in writing your name? Yes, somebody's gesturing with their pen. Do you want to write with a pencil? Do you want to write with a smelly marker? Or do you want to write with chalk? What else could you give choice on?
You could give them a choice of like maybe writing on a different kind of board.
Yeah, what you're going to write on. You going to write your name on just plain old paper? Do you want to sign your Spider-Man coloring book page? Do you want to write it in foam? Where do you want to do it? Would you want to do it sitting at your desk, or would you like to go do it somewhere else at the desk in the hall? Who do you want to do it with? Do you want me to sit next to you while you write your name, or would you like to have up here? So you decide the one thing that you care about and try to think about how you can give them control over all of the rest. That's what we're talking about with shared control. And then allow and teach negotiation. So here's my aha moment that I had on this one. And it was with my typically developing son, actually, who was about 6 at the time that I had this aha moment, I think. I don't really remember how old he was. But I remember that he was in the family room reading a book, and he loved to read. And I told him, David, it's time for you to come set the table, because that was his chore at the time. And he said, sure, Mom, but can I finish this chapter first? And I said, sure, that's fine, because I love to read too, and I know how important it is to finish your chapter if you're reading a good book. And so I went on making dinner, and I thought, David, because he has language, could tell me, yeah, I'm willing to do this, but could I just have a little bit more time before I come do it? And I was fine with that. Brian, my son with autism, because he didn't have that kind of language, when I said, Brian, you need to go wash your hands, I expected him to get up right away and go wash his hands, or I viewed it as non-compliance. Or he'd be, stimming on the carpet, and I'd say, Brian, go get your shoes on. And I expected him right then and there to stop his stimming and go get his shoes on. And I realized he doesn't have that ability to say, could I just stim one more minute? And then I'll go get my shoes, because probably what he's doing is just as important to him as David's reading a book was to him. And so I've learned the importance of teaching kids to do that negotiation. Now, I know that there's some kids that you're like, oh, he knows how to negotiate way too well. But for our kids who can't negotiate, think about teaching that. And I tell you, we have gotten more mileage out of that one more minute, teaching Brian, and again, lots of other kids since then, to say one more minute when he's asked to leave something he doesn't want to leave, or just doesn't want to go where he's going. And I was just thinking about it this morning as I went to wake Brian up. He's got a job now, and he has to get up for it. And I mean, it's our routine. Every single morning I go in, Brian, it's time to get up. And he's like, one more minute. And I'm like, okay. And I know to leave time. And the routine is I come in twice and say, Brian, it's time to get up. And it's like, one more minute. And then the third time, he knows that he'll say, one more minute. And I'll say, no, you had your minutes. Now it's time to get up. And he gets up. And this used to be this terrible battle before. And it's that idea of shared control, that he's not insisting it's all his way, as long as I'm not insisting it's all my way. Okay, so that's strategy 1. So strategy 2, this was the one I alluded to earlier. Don't say no, say when. So this one is particularly good if you have a function of gaining a tangible. So this can be either they want something that they can't have, or they want to not stop something that they're doing. Both of those we think of as obtaining a tangible. So what this strategy is rather than saying, no, you can't have it, which is usually what provokes the tantrum or the head hitting or the whatever your behavior is, you say yes. Yes, you can have it. When? And then you show or tell the child when he or she will get the item that he wants. You can do it by showing him. We know, I think most of us know that with kids with autism, whenever you can use a visual representation, it's often gonna stick in their heads more than using language. So if you can show them where it is on the schedule. So you have your child at school who has been playing on the iPad, you're absolutely dreading, telling him it's gonna be time to be done with the iPad because you know it's gonna evoke a tantrum. You say, it's time to be done, iPad. He's like, I don't wanna be done with iPad. You say, I know. I don't want you to be done with iPad either. Look, we have to do reading, and then you get to do iPad again, and you show him on the schedule. Or the child comes to you, I want to do iPad now. Yes, I think it's going to be great when you get to do iPad. First work, then iPad. So you're just taking that no out of it. And we use this in several different places with Brian. So one of the situations was at dinner that we tried to serve him a healthy dinner, and then he got to eat dessert, and all he really wanted was the dessert. And so he'd just be constantly asking for dessert, and his preferred dessert was potato chips. He's a salty guy instead of a sweets guy. So he'd say potato chips, and we'd say, no, you have to finish your dinner. And he'd be like, ah! As soon as he'd hear no, and then he'd do it again 2 seconds later. Potato chips, please. No, it's time to finish your dinner. Ah! And so just turning it around, and we had a little visual. He'd say, potato chips. And we'd be like, yes, you get potato chips. Look, first dinner, then potato chips. And how can he tantrum when I just said yes, right? And then a little while later, he'd say, potato chips. And I'd be like, I know, it's going to be so awesome. You get your potato chips. First potato chips, then dinner. And so you're doing a couple things. So first, with some kids, just hearing the no is the trigger, and you're not saying no. That's one thing you're doing. You're making it very concrete to them when they're going to get it again. And again, sometimes it's 3 things ahead on the schedule, but if you have to do it with the iPad, yep, you get iPad. Look, we do reading, then you're going to go to library, and then you get iPad. They're like, I want iPad. I want your iPad too. It's going to be great. All we have to do is first reading, then library, and then iPad. So you're being very concrete about when they get it. And then the third thing is that then you aren't the bad guy, right? You're with them. Yes, I'm so excited that you get potato chips after dinner. Dang that schedule. It says first you have to eat your dinner, and then you get your potato chips. So it's all about the schedule is the meanie who's saying we don't get it yet. You can be their biggest cheerleader as they keep insisting they want it. I'm with you. I want you to have it too. The schedule says first you got to do your math and then you get it. So going back to yours, and that was, so he asked about the child who was transitioning from sensory room, right? What would you do? You're going to want to show the child. I know this really helps you commiserate with the child, which I think can go a long way. So she doesn't want to leave the sensory room. I know you don't want to leave. It's a bummer. Look, we just have to go to the gen ed class. We're going to do your math again. You're showing it visually. And then we'll come back and do the sensory room again. And it can make a huge difference to a child. I think a lot of times they have no idea when it's going to get offered again. And if they know exactly what they have to do before getting it, it can make it much easier for them. Okay, so that's the don't say no, say when strategy. So the next one is what's called behavioral momentum. Is anybody here familiar with the term behavioral momentum? A couple of you. Okay, so behavioral momentum, so first, particularly good for escape-related behaviors, okay? So that should help you think about whether this might be a good thing for you to try. So the idea is, so we have a child who, it's especially good when they're being non-compliant with certain demands, okay? That's when we tend to use behavioral momentum. So you just know, again, asking them to give up their iPad is going to result in it, or asking them to clean up, or whatever the demand is, or get in their car seat, or whatever. What behavioral momentum is getting the child, what I think of as on a roll of compliance before delivering the difficult demand. So you give 3 to 5 easy directives and then the hard one. So what might this look like? So we have little George. So George hates to get in his car seat, and you just dread asking him to do it because you know it's going to be a battle. So you give him a series of easy things that he can do no problem first. So you say, George, touch your nose. He touches his nose. Good job, George. Give me 5. George gives you 5. Awesome, George, you gave me 5. Can you clap your hands? George claps his hands. He's like, wow, I am pretty impressive. Excellent, you clapped your hands. Climb in your car seat. Ta-da! And this sounds pretty simple and maybe a little unbelievable, but I have to say the research on this is pretty impressive in how it can work to get kids to comply with demands. So they always kind of start out in the research kind of collecting the series of demands that the child is complying with between 0 and 10% of the time. Then they find these directives that the child's perfectly willing to do, and they show that if you throw those in first, the child's willing to comply with the more difficult demand. One of the places that we used this pretty effectively was for this, think about that dreaded demand that you just don't want to have to deliver to your child or to your student. And mine was trying to get Brian out of the bathtub. He loved water, and it was so hard to get him out. And for a while I was just getting utterly soaked as I'd try to get him splashing out of the bathtub. I finally figured out, probably way longer than I should have, that I should empty out the water first. But it was still very difficult. The tub was all slippery, he was all slippery, and he was fighting me. So I would do this, and he had an ABA program, so he was very good at these simple things like touch your nose, pat your head, rub your tummy. And I'd do a sequence of those, and then I'd just throw in stand up. And he'd just stand right up, and I'd get him out of there so quick. Again, the analogy that they use in the literature is thinking of it like a snowball running down a hill. It's actually the same concept of momentum that they use in physics. As it's rolling down the hill, going faster and faster, it gets harder to stop. And it's the same idea with the kids in compliance, that when you're on a roll of compliance, it's harder to put on the brakes and start non-complying. Okay, so here's just another example. It's been used in food refusal. There's research on this. So an example. So you pick something that the child really likes, in this case, piece of French fry. Okay, take a bite. And you give the child a piece of French fry. wow, that was great, nice job. Take another bite. You give them another piece of French fry. Wow, excellent, you're a good eater. Take another bite of French fry. Well done. Take a bite, and now you give them carrots. And they eat. So something to experiment with. Again, very easy thing to just take home and try, or take to school and try. So I also just wanted to add, because it may not be obvious, that you can think, if you're a teacher or somebody in an academic environment, that you can use this concept in academics also. So think about a child who the dreaded command, but it's on their IEP, so you have to work on it, is 2-digit addition. And they just fight it. They're like, I can't do this, it's too hard, although you think they're perfectly capable of doing it. That's the key. They have to be perfectly capable of doing it. They just aren't doing it. So you make your addition worksheet, and this is easy to do now with all the internet tools. So look, the first one is a single digit. 2 plus 5 is 7. The child's, I'm good at that, 7. The next one, 4 plus 4, 8. I'm good at that. 1 plus 0, 1. I'm good at that. 23 plus 29. Whoa, I can do that. Then it goes back again to 1 digit. 2 plus 6, 2 plus 9. And then you throw in a double digit. So it's just like that same concept of behavioral momentum, except put on a worksheet. And so you can think about doing it with school tasks as well. Okay. That is behavioral momentum. So the next prevention strategy that I wanted to talk about is modifying aversive tasks or activities. And this is a huge one. The big idea here, so first of all, this is particularly good for escape behaviors, okay? It's especially good for escape behaviors. And the big idea with this prevention strategy is this. So think about whatever your student or your child is trying to get out of. You think they're doing this to escape something, right? So think about that activity or that demand or that task that they're trying to escape, and ask yourself, why? Why are they so determined to escape this? Now, I firmly believe that kids don't come into the world disliking things. They don't come into the world disliking math or disliking sitting at the therapy table working or disliking name your thing, sitting in circle time at school. They start disliking it because they've found that in some way it's aversive to them. And so if you want to prevent it, you need to think about why. Yeah, I think of it as in some way this demand, this activity, this situation has exceeded their belief in what they're able to cope with. It may not have exceeded your belief in what they should be able to cope with, but it's exceeded their belief in what they're able to cope with. And so if we're going to try to prevent it, we have to try to modify that situation in some way so that they feel like they can cope with it and don't have to engage in behaviors to get out of it. And this just takes a little thought on your part and sometimes a little experimentation, because there's lots of ways we could modify it. So for instance, can I make it easier? So is the problem that is just too hard for them? And again, we have to let go of what I think they should be able to do, and try to see it from their perspective. And so making it easier sometimes means going back below what we think they're capable to a point that they are willing to do it. And one of the reasons sometimes we have to make it way easier than what we want is because they've developed this association now. Like they're looking at a math worksheet and they're saying, I cannot do math. And so because again, they didn't come into this not liking math, but they've had experiences doing it and failing typically that have suggested to them, this is too hard for me. And so we have to go way back to super easy stuff to convince them, you can do math, it's not that bad, and then slowly make it more difficult again, but very much slower than we obviously did before. So can I make it easier? Can I make it shorter? So sometimes the problem isn't that it's not too hard, it's that it's too long. And so think about your student or your child. If they're willing to do whatever you want them to do for a while, but then they start to engage in challenging behaviors, that's usually a sign that this may just be too long for them. So if they're willing, if it's a school situation, if they're willing to sit at circle time or at library time or whatever for a certain, or in the gen ed classroom for a certain amount of time, they do just fine. But then they start to escalate or engage in behaviors, maybe you've just exceeded the amount of time they're able to do this right now. And you have to step back. So we've done that lots of times with kids, like PE. Yes, we'd like them to be in PE for the full 30 minutes, but we need to start now with they're going to be in PE for 3 minutes. So we convince them PE is not that bad. All you have to do is step in the door, walk once around. You are all done PE. You are great at PE. And you do that for a while till they're like, okay, I don't have to engage in behaviors in PE. This is easy. All they're going to ask me to do is walk around the perimeter of the gym once. And then you're like, okay, we're going to do PE. I need you to walk around the perimeter and bounce the ball once. So then you just slowly start increasing it. Can I make it more meaningful? So sometimes, a lot of times, actually, with kids with autism, what's meaningful to us, we know why we're having them do this. It has absolutely no meaning to them. So being creative and trying to think, how can I make this more meaningful to this child? So here's an example of that. And it wasn't so related to challenging behaviors, it was more related to learning. But we had all kinds of challenging behaviors during our ABA program where we were trying to get our son to learn his letters and his numbers. And we were doing, like touch 3, touch 4, touch 9 on cards, kind of endlessly, thousands of trials, and having lots of behavior, and he wasn't learning his numbers. I mean, I can't imagine how many trials we did, and he still couldn't discriminate 0 and 8. And we tried all these kinds of things. Well, at some point, as he got taller, I came up with the idea of when he got home from school, I would have him push the combination on the garage to get into the house, and he wanted to get into the house because he knew he was going to have a snack. And so I cleverly made the combo 0808. And boy, did he learn those numbers fast. When the point of discriminating the numbers was to get into the garage. And we ascertained he really did learn them. It wasn't that he just learned the position on the pad, because then we started testing it in other places. So we made it meaningful to him. So think about if there's a way with an aversive task you can make it more meaningful. Can I embed it in something fun, kind of the same thing? Can I give more help with it? So again, we have our conception of what this child should be capable of. And then there's the reality, or at least what they think they're capable of. And it reminds me of a conversation I had with a parent. It was actually after a talk I had done on challenging behaviors. And she came in and was talking to me about her son, who she was having all kinds of problems with getting homework done after school. She said he just fights it from the minute he's supposed to start doing it. It's just a battle. And so I started asking some questions, and I said, well, has it been all year? And she said, yeah, I think it was like December when I had done the talk. She said, yeah, it's been getting worse and worse. And I said, do you think that it's too much homework for him? And she's like, no, I don't think so. And I said, do you think it's too hard? No, I think it's fine. And then I said, well, did he have problems last year? And she's like, no, he's never had problems with homework before. And he was, I don't know if I said this, that he was in 3rd grade. And I had seen, working with a number of kids, there's a big jump up right about that time in both the amount and the difficulty of the homework. Although it seems to get lower and lower now. I think kindergartners have 30 minutes of difficult homework. And the fact that, again, he didn't come into the world not willing to do homework. In fact, he had done it quite willingly for years, suggested to me that even though his teacher and his parents felt that it wasn't too long and it wasn't too hard, he was perceiving it as either too long or too hard or both. So they could make it easier, they could make it shorter, or they could give more help with it. Okay, so those are some thoughts about modifying aversive activities and tasks. Okay, so then the last prevention strategy I want to talk about, and again, I snuck a bunch of prevention strategies into one big area, preparing for transition. So how many of you have had either students or you have kids who have problems with transitions? So most hands are going up because it's a big thing, and that's why I tend to slip in a lot of strategies for it. We just know that kids with autism, for a multitude of reasons, have problems with transitions. One of the things with transitions is that sometimes they're trying to escape things. They're trying to escape having to go where they're going, or they're just trying to escape, like the example I gave with the little girl at the start of this talk, just escape the unpredictability of it all. We know that kids with autism don't like unpredictability. They like sameness, and transitions, if nothing else, are a change, right? And I don't know if any of you have had kids who will fight like the dickens to transition from something they're doing, but then as soon as you finally get them to the new thing, that's the same now, and that's what they're going to fight like dickens to not have to change from. So it's just the change, not that they don't particularly like the activity that they're going to. Okay, so just going to throw out a bunch of ideas. Some of them may work for you, some of them won't. In general, I'm just trying to give you guys this big toolkit of ideas, and you can go home. Some of them will work, some of them won't. Okay, so the first one is to make sure the child understands where he or she is going. And I have had so many instances of people telling me, oh yes, I am absolutely sure he knows where he's going or she knows where she's going. And I say, well, could you just humor me? Let's try showing her a picture of where she's going. And she transitions just fine. So even if you're sure you know the child knows where they're going, you might want to try this anyway. So giving either with pictures, some kids, pictures, if the pictures aren't working, sometimes you might want to try actual objects that represent where they're going. And you might have to use it a couple times. Don't give up too soon because they have to learn that this object means I'm going here. So whether it's a lunchbox or they're carrying a ball, which means they're going to PE, or they're carrying a book, which means they're going to the gen ed class. Again, don't give up the first day that you have them carry a book and it doesn't work because they haven't associated that book means this is where I'm going. But one strategy to try. Give plenty of warning, and this is one that most people know, but people just don't do quite as often as they think they do. I've seen it a lot of times, especially in school situations where the child will definitely have this on their IEP under accommodations that they're supposed to be given warnings, but I just see people forgetting, right? You get busy, you don't have time, and then all of a sudden it's time to transition and the child is just told it's time to go. You can do verbal warnings if they work. You can use visual timers like a time timer, which probably a lot of you are familiar with. Now on your on smartphones, there's all kinds of apps for visual timers. A couple things that I will say about these visual timers: the child has to understand it. And so, for instance, like we tried a visual timer for a number of years, and my son just never understood it. He never understood the idea. He'd heard us say red is gone enough times that he'd just be like, red is gone, red is gone, red is gone, when it was clear, no, Brian, the red is not gone. And it was clearly just frustrating him. He seemed to think that if he said it enough, and actually he got reinforced for this, because if he said it enough, eventually we'd say, yeah, the red is gone, because it had, in that time it had gone. But I think he thought he just didn't get this, and he thought that it was just saying it. So you have to experiment, and the nice thing about the smartphone apps is there are different ways to represent time on those, and so you can experiment around the one that works for your individual. A countdown visual, I really like these. So these, I don't know if any of you have used them. I'm not supposed to walk around too much. I can use I don't know how to use my pointer. So this one, so you just have numbers, and then, at about 3 minutes, you can be loose with the time, but at some point you say, okay, we're getting close, and you take the 3 down. You're getting a little bit closer. Okay, it's almost time to go, and you take the 2 down. So it's kind of good for us because it keeps us honest that we can't go until all the numbers are gone. So it makes sure that we've really given 3 warnings as opposed to kind of thinking we might have given 3 warnings. Very concrete for them. So, okay. Another strategy, giving the child some control over when and how the transition is made. So this is back to that idea of shared control. So what you care about is they get from point A to point B. They get control over everything else. So can you let them finish what they're doing? Sometimes that can help. Allow and teach negotiation around when they're going to make the transition. Give choices. Do you want to they're playing with their animal. Do you want to bring your animal with you? Do you want to go this way? We have to go to the gen ed classroom, but you can go this way or you can go this way. Do you want to hold my hand or walk by yourself? Just think about what choices can I give them? Well, I still get that one thing that really matters to me. Another thing to try is providing distractors for the transition. So a child gets to carry a favorite toy with them. Sometimes we'll do it that they have this one toy that's just for transitions, that they only get it during transitions. This can be a good one for in the car if you have problems with that they only get to hold this or play with it when they're in their car seat in the car, and it can alleviate a lot of problems there. The child carries something they need at the destination, which again can just distract them so much that they don't mind the transition because they're so busy focusing on the thing they're carrying for the other end. Child gets to listen to an iPod during the transition. Again, they really like their iPad, so we pair the thing they don't like, the transition, with the thing they do like, the iPod. So providing distractors. And then this last one, thinking about, especially if they're having to lead something they like to go to something they don't like so much, trying to arrange for something good at the other end. And we've used this a lot. So when a child comes to the dinner table, they don't really like coming to the dinner table. They don't really like eating. Eating is a battle because you're always trying to make them eat things they don't like to eat. letting them do something they like at the dinner table for a few minutes before the toys go away and it's time to eat. This one we've used a lot with kids who entering the gen ed classroom because it's often very unpredictable, a child who's kind of in and out of gen ed. They never know what they're going to be asked to do there. They never know what's going on, what's going to be going on when they come in. When they enter the gen ed classroom, they always get to look at a favorite magazine for a few minutes before having to join whatever the class is doing. So first, they know they're going to get to do something that they like, at least for a little while, and it makes the whole thing more predictable. Yeah, there's going to be something unpredictable after it, but at least I know what's always going to happen when I enter the class. Okay, so those are our 5 big prevention strategies. Shared control, don't say no, say when, behavioral momentum, modify aversive tasks and activities, and prepare for transitions. Okay? So that's the focus on prevention. Now let me talk for a little while about teaching a replacement. So this is, again, a fundamental concept in positive behavior support. So the big idea, if you take one thing away from this idea of teaching a replacement, is that whatever you're thinking about that your child or student is doing that you don't want them to do, and that's usually a long list, that's why you're here, right? You're never going to try to just get them to not do that. You're going to try to teach them something else to do instead. You're always going to give them something else to do. So, one of the things, the most common, and what we know from the research is usually the most effective, is teaching them some sort of behavior that serves the same function as the behavior. So oftentimes, the function, they're communicating something. If they're escaping, they're communicating, I don't want to do this, or I need a break from this, or no. We're going to try to teach them to communicate that appropriately. So we're saying, even though I don't want you to escape this, I want you to do it, I at least am going to acknowledge that you have this need, and I'm going to teach you how to do it appropriately. So to think about a communicative alternative, you think about, if my child or my student in this situation could communicate appropriately, what do I think he would say? And a lot of times people have no problems coming up with that. Sometimes people don't know what the child is trying to say, but in a lot of situations they're like, oh yeah, I know what, again, I may not like it, but I know what he's trying to say. First thing we're going to do is try to teach him an appropriate way to say it. Then we can teach him, so we want him to sit through library time. He's engaging in behavior to escape it. Or let's actually use an example that was given earlier, a child who's trying to escape working at the table, their therapy time. What we want for them to do is to sit through therapy, right? To do it. But they are communicating with their behavior, I don't want to do this. The idea of teaching replacement behaviors is the first thing we're going to do is teach them an appropriate way to say, I don't want to do this, and they're going to get out of it. They're getting out of it anyway, right, with their behavior. So we're not really losing too much at this point. We're just teaching them an appropriate way to do it. Then, once they've learned an appropriate way to communicate it, then we can start saying, well, I know you don't want to. Thanks for telling me, but we have to do a little bit, and then you can get out of it and start building up their endurance. But we start with teaching them an appropriate way to communicate what their behavior is telling us they need. It doesn't need to be verbal. So we will teach kids to sign, if signing is what the communication they're using. We'll teach them to gesture. We'll teach them to shake their heads to communicate no. Very effective way to communicate it. We'll teach them to give us a picture. Taught lots of kids to hand over an I need a break picture, which is kind of their not get out of jail free, get out of all the things I hate about my life free. A button on a communication device. So it can be any of those. So common examples of replacement behaviors that we will teach kids to communicate. No thanks. So we'll teach kids when we ask them to do something, no thanks. I need a break. I'm all done. I want to stay here, right? The kid who's getting all upset when they're asked to transition from something. Help me. Pay attention to me. Go away. So these are all common replacement behaviors that will teach kids to communicate. Again, and it may be verbal, but it may be with a picture, it may be with a sign, maybe with a gesture. I want that. Sometimes if the behavior is more sensory, we talked about automatically reinforced behavior, we try to think of something that might get them the same sensory input, but in a more appropriate manner. My son had self-stimulatory behavior through the roof, so we did a lot of these. So thinking about what would give similar sensory feedback in a more appropriate manner. So a chewy instead of hand biting for a child who hand bites. So a child who's always flapping their hands in the air. Well, if you could teach them, and we did, to flap down here, the child, it might not be quite as good as whatever they're getting from up here, but down here, it looks a lot more appropriate. And like we actually started, Brian was a huge hand flapper, and we, once he started wearing jeans, started putting all kinds of different keychain type things on his a belt loop, and just taught him to flap that. Look totally appropriate, or at least way more appropriate than flapping hands. Picking its silly putty instead of nose. We did this with one child who would pick their nose in class, and obviously not very great in a gen ed environment. We were really trying to include him, and we decided he wasn't doing it for any social reasons. No, people were trying to ignore it, so we just got him some silly putty. We're trying to, not to be gross about it, but like, what do you get from picking your nose, and what could we give you to that might replace that? Kissing mom instead of mouthing. So this is one of my all-time favorite replacement behaviors with Brian. He used to, so in his early years, he paid no attention to me at all. But at some point, with a lot of work, he started obviously recognizing who I was and liking to interact with me. And one of the things he would do is he'd just come in, he would mouth me. And he just kind of mouthed my face. And he was very oral also. And at first, I was delighted because he would only mouth me. So I was obviously special, and I just welcomed any sort of initiation. But after a while, it started getting pretty old. I mean, I was constantly just wiping saliva off my face. And in case anyone was wondering, saliva does nothing for your complexion. I was kind of hoping for a while that maybe it would be like some expensive cream, but it wasn't. So I was like, okay, so what are the functions of the behavior? It must be some sort of social thing, right? Because he's only doing it with me. If it was just sensory, then he'd be doing it to anybody, because anybody's face is like anybody else's. But there's also, and I knew him, again, he did lots of oral stuff, so I knew he was also getting something oral out of it, pleasurable out of just the mouthing part of it. So I was like, okay, so what is something that could replace both of those functions, or at least try to replace them and be more appropriate? I thought, well, what if I teach him to kiss me? And he'd never learned how to kiss. So we taught him how to kiss. We just kind of practice outside of this situation. And then every time he'd come up and start to mouth me, I'd be like, because that's how we taught him. We taught him to imitate that. And I'd get him to kiss my cheek. And it worked great. He started always coming up and kissing me. And then it was awesome because, and he did it for years. He only really stopped doing it a couple years ago. And people, even as a teenager, he'd just kind of walk up and give me a kiss. And all my friends would be like, oh, I wish my child would do that. And I mean, we'd be standing in the line at Costco and Brian would just walk up and give me a kiss. And I'd just have people say, oh, I think that's so awesome that your son does that. And I was like, I know, it's great. So, but we got something that met the same function. He was interacting with me, but in a oral way that worked for him. So, and then the last thing to think about in teaching replacement is we'll teach calming strategies. So sometimes teaching them something that replaces the function just isn't going to work. You know when you take your child to the dentist and they start tantruming that what they're communicating is, I don't want to. But it's just not a choice, right? There's things that even if we teach them the appropriate communication, we can't give it to them. So sometimes we'll just teach them a coping strategy instead. So sometimes we'll teach a child, before you start engaging in behavior, try taking some deep breaths. Or try squeezing your hands together. So a child who wants to hit somebody, we'll teach them to, when they get upset like that, squeeze your hands together. Self-talk. We'll teach a child when they're starting to get upset, we'll teach them maybe next time, or just some kind of self-talk. Sometimes we'll teach them to just leave the situation. We'll do this with older kids. It's a really great strategy with a junior high or high school student. In the situation where they're getting upset, just leave the situation. And it's an accommodation that will get on an IEP that all the teachers have to be okay with them just leaving the situation, because that's a great coping strategy. One caution on these calming strategies is that this is what we all want to teach because it's so inconvenient to have our child be saying, I don't want to, or no, or help me. We'd rather they just buck up and bear it, right? Take some deep breaths and do what we want them to do. But you have to know that the research really suggests that the function-based replacements are by far the most effective. So if you can teach them something that's getting them what the challenging behavior was getting them, it's much more likely to work. These calming strategies I've seen can work great, but they're not the same as the function-based ones. I think this is in your handout, just an example of, so losing is actually a great one. I don't know if any of you have kids who fall apart when they lose a game, but it's one where what they're saying is, I don't want to lose, right? But that's not going to endear them very much with their peers, because their peers don't want to lose anyway. So their peers aren't going to be like, oh, okay. A few peers will do that, but most of them won't. So we need to teach the child strategies for tolerating losing rather than just communicating, I don't want to lose, as an appropriate way to win every time. So teaching the replacement. So how do you've identified what you want to teach them. How do you do it? So you look for situations where the challenging behavior is typically happening. You know kind of what's going to trigger it. You try to catch the child before they engage in the challenging behavior and prompt the new behavior. And then immediately reinforce the communication. So what might this look like? So I will give you the example of the very first time I ever taught functional communication, and I've taught it probably many, many times since then. But I had just read about it. I was learning about it in my PBS seminar about this is called functional communication training. I'm like, I think we could do this with Brian. So we went home. And the problem we were having was Brian getting really upset when he was asked to transition from something he really liked to do to something he didn't like to do. So at school, it was when he was doing stuff in the sensory room and had to transition to gen ed. One of the really common places at home was when he would transition in his after his bedtime routine. We'd give him a bath where we'd use behavioral momentum to get him up, and then we'd get his PJs on, and he got to jump on the bed for a while before he had to go brush his teeth. I already talked about he didn't like brushing his teeth. He really liked jumping on the bed. So he would, and his behavior was hair pulling. You talked about hair pulling. He was good at that. And we were always in the line of fire because we needed to kind of get right down to his level and get close to him to try to get him to pay attention to us. So I'd be there, okay, Brian, it's time to go brush your teeth. And he'd just reach out and pull my hair. He was doing a lot of that at school also. And so we decided that what he was trying to communicate was, I want to stay here, right? He wanted to keep jumping on the bed. So what we decided we were going to teach it during teeth brushing. So we would go up to him. We decided we'd just let go of actually brushing teeth for a week or so while we taught this, because you kind of have to do that. You have to let go of what you want to focus on teaching the child to communicate appropriately. So what we would do is I would go up to him as he's jumping on the bed. I'd get in front of him like I usually did, and I'd say, Brian, it's time to go brush your teeth. Say, I want to stay here. He wasn't very verbal, but he could repeat phrases. He was really good at repeating phrases, so I could do that. I could say, I want to stay here. He'd say, I want to stay here. He'd repeat it, and I was like, okay, thanks for telling me you can stay here. And I just left him. And at first he's like, and he'd keep jumping on the bed. And a couple minutes later, I'd go back. I'd say, Brian, it's time to go brush your teeth. Say, I want to stay here. He'd say, I want to stay here. I'd be like, oh, thanks for telling me. And I'd leave. And I think he had no idea what was going on, but he loved it. Because I just, like that night, I probably did that 10 times. I'd come there. I'd say, Brian, it's time to brush your teeth. Say, I want to stay here. He'd say it, and I'd leave. And what was so amazing to me, and I've seen this again and again teaching kids functional communication, is that it may take him 1,000 trials to learn his shapes, but he learned I want to stay here like in a night. He learned it so quickly. And so like within just a couple days, I just go, Brian, it's time to go brush your teeth. I want to stay here. And I'd leave. So that's how you teach it. You kind of put them in the situation, you prompt the new communication, and then you reinforce it by whatever it is that they're communicating. So I know you have to practice this. So I know you guys are wondering, yeah, but what happens when he needs to really brush his teeth? And believe me, I was wondering that too. I was like, yeah, this is all well and good. He's saying this, it's great, he learned it so fast, but we got to brush teeth at some point, right? And again, this was the first time I'd done this, so I didn't know what was going to happen. So that is teaching tolerance to delay of reinforcement. And so what we did, you have to wait until they're reliably using this new communication you've taught them. And again, it usually doesn't take long because their behavior had been showing you they care about this outcome. Now you're just giving them another way to get it, an easier way to get it. So what we decided once he had it was he was going to get to do it twice. He was going to get to say, I want to stay here. And then on the third time when he said it, we were going to say, yeah, I know you want to stay here, but now we really have to go brush teeth. And it was like a miracle. And I have people who can vouch for this miracle because they were there too. That we found that if we let him say it a couple times, he would then be willing to transition. And I have to say, I've just seen that with kids again and again, that we think we teach them to say, I need a break, they're never going to work again. Or we teach them to say, I don't want to. They're never going to do anything they want to again. And it's that thing of shared control again, that most of the time they don't. They will be willing to do it as long as we're giving them a little bit of control. So ways that you can start building up their tolerance for delay to getting what they want. So you can start saying, so you've taught a child, I need a break. Sure, you can have a break, but let's write, you're letting them get out of handwriting. Let's write one letter, and then you can have your break. So you start just sneaking in a little bit of a demand before you give them what they want, and then gradually increase it. I can see you need help. So you've taught a child to say, I need help, instead of screeching, and they've got it down, except that they're saying, I need help all of the time. I can see you need help. Give me 1 minute, and then I'll come help you. So you start with just a little bit of time, and then build it up. You already had 2 minutes, just like Brian and the I want to stay here. You already had 2 more minutes. It's now time to come to dinner. So you create a monster, but then you gradually get a livable situation out of it. And think about it with typical kids. What is the first thing a typical kid says? No. And we're thrilled, but at the same time, it's kind of darned inconvenient for us, right? That our child now can actually talk and tell us no. So we're excited at first that they say no, and then we spend the next 21 years of their life teaching them that sometimes saying no doesn't work. We kind of use the same idea here. First, we teach them how to communicate it, and then we start slowly teaching them that there's parameters around it. So I am out of time. So just the idea of minimize, maximize, fortunately, is really short. It's just that you want to, once you know what they're getting out of the behavior, you want to try to minimize the reinforcement for the problem behavior. If you know they're trying to escape, to the best of your ability, keep them from escaping, and maximize the reinforcement for appropriate behavior. So if they're escaping, try to reduce the possibility that they will escape. If they're doing it for attention, try to minimize the attention they get for the problem behavior. And obtaining a tangible, if you can, keep them from getting the thing they want. And then totally let them get it if they're engaging in appropriate behavior. So I am happy, since I know I didn't leave any time for questions because I was talking so much. I'm happy to stay after and answer any questions. Can I, Jim? Can I do that with the other sites first? Okay. Okay. They can come up and talk to me. Thank you. Yep. Okay. I want to just, since I think you all have the handout, I want to direct your attention to 2 things in your handout that you can just look at. I've put a page of some resources if you want some more reading on positive behavior support. I gave a couple for parents and a couple for schools that I would recommend. And then just something about if you're really, these are just simple strategies for not too extreme behaviors that I talked about. But if you feel like you are dealing with something more difficult or complex, some ways to get help. So does anybody in the other sites have any quick questions for me? How about here? Okay, go ahead.
I just want to ask, is there a certain cutoff where you know a certain method is not working, so you change it, or do you wait to see on the first few times that it's actually doing some change and then you keep doing it, and if you don't see that, you stop it?
It's a great question, and I don't know if anybody's still there at the other sites, but I'll repeat it just in case. The question was, is there a certain amount of time you should try something? I mentioned, I gave you kind of a smorgasbord of strategies, some of which might work with your child or some that might not. Is there a certain amount of time you should try something before giving up or deciding this isn't working, I should try something else? The unfortunate answer is there's no magic number. And the reason for that is it has to do a lot with how long the child has been engaging in the behavior. because so remember, if the child's continuing to engage in behavior, it means that they are getting reinforced for it. And if they've been doing it for a long time, it means they've been getting reinforced for it for a long time. And the longer a child's been getting reinforced for something, the harder it is to change. So if it's a new behavior that hasn't been happening for very long, I would expect any of these strategies, if they're going to work pretty quickly. Whereas if it's been something that's going on for a long time, you may have to try it longer. So for example, like the prevention strategy of make something easier. So say you're trying it like for getting dressed. Like you've just been battling getting dressed for a couple years, and now you're thinking, maybe it's just too hard. I'm asking too much. Maybe I should back up to all he has to do is pull up his pants, and I'll just do the rest of it. He has had 2 years to build this really aversive relationship between getting dressed or this aversive association with getting dressed. And so it may take him longer to start believing it's really not that bad. All you have to do is pull up your pants to stop engaging in behaviors than it would for a child who you picked up on it pretty quickly and they just had a couple days or a couple weeks of engaging in behavior before you decided this is too hard, we need to make it easier. So in general, the prevention strategies work more quickly than, say, teaching a replacement, because the prevention, a lot of times what you're hoping is you just remove the triggers for the behavior. But so I wish there was a magic thing like, yep, try it 3 days. If it doesn't work in 3 days, move on. But it depends, as so many things do. Yes?
I have a student, she also expresses Down syndrome. She really loves eating, and she gets off the school bus, goes to the lunchroom, has breakfast, and then is to transition to PD class. She takes a long time eating, and I don't want to interfere with her life by saying you must stop eating. Also, I think her reaction to be told you can't eat anymore would be horrific. So I don't know how to move her from the lunchroom to the gym. I don't know how to interfere with her leisure and long live breakfast.
So that's a great situation to think about a number of the strategies that we've talked about.
Yeah.
But I have to preface it with, as a behavior analyst, I am ethically not supposed to consult on kids other than in the context of a professional relationship, and I'm not supposed to advise on kids that I haven't seen. So I am going to be talking in generalities about what you might do, but I don't want you to think I'm advising you on your particular student, okay?
Agreed.
So does that all make sense? Again, I believe function is important, so I shouldn't be advising on a child without figuring out the function. So, but the first thing that comes to mind that I would ask in a situation like this is that first item on shared control, picking your battles. So first of all, that might be a question I'd ask. How important is it? Again, I don't know this child or the amount of problem behaviors that are being dealt with, but if there's a lot, I'd say, like, let her finish her breakfast. If that gets her off to a good start, if we're going to, doing something at the start of the day that causes problems can sometimes be really problematic, because then the whole day is messed up. And so if you can do something at the start of the day to set the tone, I mean, we'll often look for, kids who just, it seems like their whole day is a battle. what could they do right after they get to school that's pleasurable to them to set the stage? And so with this person, it could be that you have that thing and let's not mess with it. Okay, so that might be one thing I would think about is pick your battles. Another thing would be, okay, I need to, so now we're talking about transitions, right? Transitions from something that she really likes to something that maybe she doesn't like as well. So thinking about the transition strategies. So one would be to, so giving warnings, right? That was one. Giving warnings of when you're going to have to transition. With this situation, you could do it in several ways. You could use a visual timer to give her warnings. You could use a countdown visual to give her warnings. You could even use the food itself as the visual, that this is how much you get to eat for breakfast, and that's it. I'm going to put what you're allowed to have here. Then there's no, again, you're not saying you have to stop eating. It's the food that's saying you have to stop eating. That's all the food there is. I know. I wish you could keep eating too, but all the food's gone. So you can use kind of the food as the bad guy. Another thing you could think about is trying to have something pleasurable at the other end. So again, I don't know this child. In the worst case, could she pick one thing from her breakfast that she gets to take with her or that you're going to carry and she eats at the other end, if food is really what's most reinforcing? But is there something else that she really likes that you could use for that one transition of the day? Sometimes picking the thing that they like most for the really hard transition and holding it close. At the only time you get to look at this particular magazine or do this particular thing is when you make that really hard transition. So that might be an idea. So just kind of, I don't know if any of those were like, oh yeah, I think that could work. But do you have an idea or you have another question?
Well, I know I had a child similar about the transition or not wanting to, but then well, at least right now what we have to get back to is the iPod.
Oh, yeah.
A song that my child loves.
Yeah.
And,
She loves music too, so how do you use that?
well, I just have my phone and have headphones, so it's not bothering other people. But as long as she's moving, the music's going, and she stops, and the music goes off. And
So you say if you stand up, then you get the headphones?
um,
How does it work?
well, we actually, what they started trying to do is like if we're leaving a preferred activity and going to a non-preferred or leaving a preferred activity where we just kind of just get going, but we wait. I mean, we do the 3 minutes or whatever, and then just put it on and start going, and so we don't even talk about it much. We just start talking.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and just matter of factly, okay, it's time to go. Get your iPod, get your headphones on.
But
And
they're going from a kid who just was really extreme and sit for an hour if she wanted.
yeah, yeah.
So, so I have a question. So
Okay.
I'm going to ask, if you're saying about replacement behaviors, so so you have a child that has multiple self-stimulatory behaviors, and you know, I guess I know it's like say they're at school and they're trying to get them to work on stuff and they're doing self-stimulatory.
Let me just kind of tell. Thank you all for coming. Please don't feel like you have to stay. I know we're past our time, but thank you all for coming. Okay, so multiple self-stimulatory behaviors.
Yes, and but then they don't want them to do it like usually want to be ready or I guess I'm just wondering like okay, so say they're
and it's kind of a fundamental belief of mine that we should that's just a great example, again, not consulting on this particular child, in general, that we don't ever just teach them, don't do that. We give them something else to do instead. I mean, I think of the self-stimulatory behaviors a lot of times like some of the habits that we've had. I don't know if any of you have chewed your fingernails, or I used to drink Diet Coke, way too much Diet Coke, and it was just kind of this habit. I couldn't just say, I'm not going to drink Diet Coke. I needed to give myself something else to do at that time. So I switched, to seltzer water with juice. People who bite their fingernails, they have to give themselves something else to do instead. So it's the same thing, like telling a child to not do this, but not giving them a replacement behavior. I couldn't do it, so why would I think that a child could do it, or anybody? I will say with the self-stimulatory behaviors also, and I think sticking hands in pants is one that we really do need to address, because it's just people, it's not appropriate. But I've really, on a lot of other self-stimulatory behaviors, I've really swung to talk about pick your battles, like really think, is it worth it? They are so hard to get rid of. People with autism who can talk, with higher functioning autism, really talk about how these help them, how they calm them, how they feel to them. And so our right to, just because we think it looks weird, to say, you can't do this thing that's really helping you. I mean, some people, we just don't know much about what they're doing, but some people think, they're really giving neurological stimulation or something that's helping them. And so I'm like, the world needs to deal with, get used to people who flap their hands. It's not hurting anybody, So my son's doing his part. We go proudly out. And so again, I think hands and pants is, I'm not expecting society to start tolerating that one anytime soon, but some of the others really think about, and yeah, so. Yes. Yes. One last question.
Thanks. I think they tie together because at my school there is pressure that, the kid's going to have to go in the real world and they're going to have to leave the lunchroom and go to work. And so don't tell me that this is okay because she needs to have a good start to her day and not do what the rest of us are doing. So you teach her to do what the rest of us are doing. What are good words to respond to that?
Well, I have a 23-year-old now, so I have entered the brave new world of adult services and been doing lots of reading, lots of learning in that. And we are learning that in our places of employment also, that we need to make accommodations for people, and that if we want a healthy, involved workforce, we need to make accommodations for people. We need to offer break areas for people. We need to have places where, we need to have things that people can sit on that allow them to bounce. We need to give people flexible schedules, right? All of us, not even people with special needs. So I don't buy that. I think that when we force all of humanity to march in lockstep, things fall apart, that we all need to adapt and accommodate. And truly, with all of these kids with autism growing up, my son was kind of on the forefront of that first wave. There's going to be so many kids with autism who are now adults with autism that need jobs. And places of employment are going to have to accommodate. And so, is that a good answer?
That's great.
Good. All right. Thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate it. Hope you all have something you can go home and try.